Chapter 2, Original Edition. The Illusion of Separation. Introduction. This section deals with a fundamental misuse of knowledge, referred to in the Bible as the cause of the, quote, fall or separation. There are some definitions which I asked you to take from the dictionary, which will be helpful here. And they are somewhat unusual since they are not the first definition which are given. Nevertheless, the fact that each of these definitions does appear in the dictionary should be reassuring. And the first word is project. It's a verb and it means to extend forward or out. Project as a noun means a plan in the mind. And the word world from the dictionary means a natural grand division. We will refer later to projection as related to both mental health and mental illness. We have already observed that man can create an empty shell, but man cannot create nothing at all. This emptiness provides the screen for the misuse of projection. The Garden of Eden, which is described as a literal garden in the Bible, was not an actual garden at all. The Garden of Eden was merely a mental state of complete need-lack. Even in the literal account, it is noteworthy that the pre-separation state was essentially one in which man needed nothing. The so-called tree of knowledge is also an overly literal figure. These concepts need to be clarified before the real meaning of the separation or the detour into fear can be fully understood. To project, as defined above, is a fundamental attribute of God, which God gave to his souls. In the creation, God projected his creative ability from himself to the souls he created, and God also imbued his souls with the same loving will to create. The soul has not only been fully created, but has also been created perfect, which means there is no emptiness in the soul. Because of the soul's likeness to its creator, the soul is creative. No child of God can lose this creative ability because this creative ability is inherent in what any child of God is. But the child of God can use this creative ability inappropriately. Whenever projection is used inappropriately, projection always implies that some emptiness or lack exists and that it is in your ability to put your own ideas there instead of truth. Whenever projection is used inappropriately, inappropriate projection always implies that some emptiness or lack exists and that it's in your ability to put your own ideas there in that lack instead of truth. If you consider what this entails, the following will become quite apparent. First, the assumption is implicit that what God created can be changed by the mind of man. Second assumption in misprojection is the concept that what is perfect can be rendered imperfect or wanting, and that concept is accepted. third belief inherent in projection is that man can distort the creations of God, including himself. And fourth belief implied with misprojection is the idea that since man can create himself, the direction of man's own creation is up to man. Those are the four assumptions that are present in the idea of inappropriate projection. These related distortions represent a picture of what actually occurred in the separation. None of these ideas existed before. None of these assumptions existed before. Nor did these beliefs or assumptions actually exist now. The world was made as, quote, a natural grand division or a projecting outward of God. That is why everything that God created is like God. Projection, as undertaken by God, is very similar to the kind of inner radiance which the children of the Father inherit from Him. It is important to note that the term, quote, project outward, necessarily implies that the real source of projection is internal. And this is as true of you as of the Creator. The real source of projection is internal. The world, in the original connotation of the term, included both the proper creation of man by God and the proper creation by man in his right mind. The proper creation by man in his right mind required the endowment of man by God with free will. The proper creation by man in his right mind required the endowment of you by God with free will, because all loving creation is freely given. Nothing in these statements implies any sort of level involvement, or in fact anything except one continuous line of creation in which all aspects are of the same order. When the, quote, lies of the serpent were introduced, the so-called lies of the serpent were specifically called lies because they are not true. When man listened to the lies of the serpent, all man heard was untruth. Man does not have to continue to believe what is not true, unless man chooses to do so. And all of your miscreations can literally disappear in the, quote, twinkling of an eye. Because all of your miscreations are merely visual misperceptions. And that's why they can literally disappear in the twinkling of an eye. Man's spiritual eye can sleep, but a sleeping eye can still see. What is seen in dreams seems to be very real. The Bible mentions that a deep sleep fell upon Adam, and nowhere is there any reference to Adam's waking up. The history of man in the world as man sees it has not yet been marked by any genuine or comprehensive reawakening or rebirth. A comprehensive or genuine reawakening or rebirth of man is impossible as long as man projects in the spirit of miscreation. But it still remains within man, however, to project as God projected His own spirit to you. In reality, this is your only choice, because your free will was given you for your own joy in creating the perfect. All fear is ultimately reducible to the basic misperception that you have the ability to usurp the power of God. It can only be emphasized that you can nor have been able to usurp the power of God. You neither can nor have been able to usurp the power of God. In this fact lies the real justification for your escape from fear. Your escape from fear is brought about by your acceptance of the plan for the healing of your guilt, which places you in a position to realize that your own errors never really occurred. The acceptance of the correction of your ego places you in a position to realize that your own errors never really occurred. When the so-called deep sleep fell upon Adam, Adam was in a condition to experience nightmares because he was asleep. If a light is suddenly turned on while someone is dreaming a fearful dream, they may initially interpret the light itself as part of their own dream and be afraid of that light. However, when they awaken, the light is correctly perceived as the release from the dream, which is no longer accorded reality. It is quite apparent that this release from fear and this release from sleep does not depend on the kind of so-called knowledge, which is nothing more than deceiving lies. The knowledge which illuminates rather than obscures is the knowledge which not only sets you free, but which also shows you clearly that you are free. Whatever lies you may believe are of no concern to the miracle which can heal all of those lies, any of them with equal ease. Real knowledge makes no distinction among misperceptions. Truth's sole concern is to distinguish between truth on the one hand and all kinds of errors on the other hand. Some miracles may seem to be of greater magnitude than other miracles. But remember the first point in this course, that there is no order of difficulty in miracles. In reality, you are perfectly unaffected by all expressions of lack of love. And these lacks of love can be either from yourself and others, or from yourself to others, or from others to you. Peace is an attribute in you. You cannot find peace outside. All mental illness is some form of external searching. Mental health is inner peace. All mental illness is some form of external searching, and mental health is inner peace. Mental health and inner peace enables you to remain unshaken by lack of love from without. And it enables you to be capable through your own miracles of correcting the external conditions which proceed from lack of love in others. Mental health, inner peace, enables you to remain unshaken by lack of love from without, and capable through your own miracles of correcting the external conditions which proceed from lack of love in others. Section 2. The reinterpretation of defenses. When you are afraid of anything, you are acknowledging its power to hurt you. Remember that where your heart is, there is your treasure also. This means that you believe in what you value. If you are afraid, you are valuing wrongly. Human understanding will inevitably value wrongly, and by endowing all human thoughts with equal power, human understanding will inevitably destroy peace. That is why the Bible speaks of, quote, the peace of God which passeth human understanding, unquote. This peace, which passes human understanding, is totally incapable of being shaken by any human errors of any kind. This peace, which passes human understanding, denies the ability of anything which is not of God to affect you in any way. Denying the ability of anything which is not loving to affect you in any way, that is the proper use of denial. This proper use of denial is not used to hide anything. This use of denial is not used to hide anything, but this use of denial is used to correct error. The proper use of denial brings all error into the light. And since error and darkness are the same, the proper use of denial corrects error automatically, since it brings all error into the light. True denial, the proper use of denial, is a powerful protective device. And that's because you can and you should deny any belief that your errors or that any error can hurt you. You can and should deny any belief that error can hurt you. This kind of denial is not a concealment device, but a correction device. The right mind of the mentally healthy depends on this kind of device, the proper use of denial. The right mind of the mentally healthy depends on the proper use of denial, which is not a concealment device but a correction device. You can do anything I ask. I have asked you to perform miracles, and I have made it clear that miracles are natural, corrective, healing, and universal. There is nothing good that miracles cannot do, but miracles cannot be performed in the spirit of doubt. God and the souls God created are completely dependent on each other. The creation of the soul has already been perfectly accomplished, but the creation by souls has not already been perfectly accomplished. God created souls so He could depend on them because He created them perfectly. God gave them His peace so that they could not be shaken, and so that they, His souls, would be unable to be deceived. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived. Whenever you are afraid, your mind is not serving the soul. And when your mind is not serving the soul, it literally starves your soul by denying your soul its daily bread. God offers only mercy. Your words should reflect only mercy, because that is what you have received, and that is what you should give. Mercy. Justice is a temporary expedient, or an attempt to teach man the meaning of mercy. Justice is just an attempt to teach man the meaning of mercy. Justice's judgmental side, the judgmental side of justice, arises only because man is capable of injustice, if that is what man's mind creates. You are afraid of God's will because you have used your own will, which God created in the likeness of His own, to miscreate. What you do not realize is that the mind can miscreate only when the mind is not free. An imprisoned mind is not free by definition. An imprisoned mind is possessed or held back by itself. And so the will of an imprisoned mind is therefore limited, which means not free to assert itself. The real meaning of, quote, are of one kind, unquote, which was mentioned before, is, quote, are of one mind or will. When the will of the family of God and the Father are one, then their perfect accord is heaven. When our will and the will of the Creator are one, their perfect accord is heaven. Denial of error is a powerful defense of truth. you will note that we have been shifting the emphasis from the negative to the positive use of denial. As we have already stated, denial is not a purely negative device. The positive use of denial results in positive miscreation. That is why the mentally ill do employ denial. That is the way that the mentally ill employ denial. The mentally ill employ denial as a purely negative device which results in miscreation. But there is also a positive use of denial. But remember a very early thought of your own, which was, never underestimate the power of denial. In the service of the right mind, the denial of error frees the mind, which means reestablishes the freedom of the will. When the will is really free, it cannot miscreate, because the will recognizes only truth. When the will is only free, when it's truly free. False projection arises out of false denial, not out of its proper use. My own role in the plan of the healing of mankind is one of true projection. I can project to you the affirmation of truth. If you project error to me or to yourself, you are interfering with the process of me projecting to you the affirmation of truth. Project to me the affirmation of truth, love. My use of projection, which can also be yours, is not based on faulty denial. My use of projection does involve, however, the very powerful use of the denial of errors. The miracle worker is one who accepts my kind of denial and my kind of projection and unites his own inherent abilities to deny and project with mine and imposes them back on himself and others. Is the miracle worker. Accepting love's kind of denial and projection establishes the total lack of threat anywhere. Love's kind of denial and projection establishes the total lack of threat anywhere. Together, we can then work for the real time of peace, which is eternal. The improper use of defenses is quite widely recognized, but the proper use of defenses has not been sufficiently understood as yet. The proper use of defenses can indeed create man's perception both of himself and of the world. Defenses can distort or correct depending on what you use defenses for. Denial should be directed only to error and projection should be reserved only for truth. You should truly give as you have truly received. And the golden rule can work effectively only on this basis, that you should give only as you have truly received. Denial, the first defense. And the first defense, denial, should be directed only to error, and projection should be reserved only for truth. And the next defense, intellectualization, is a term which stems from the mind-brain confusion. Right-mindedness is the device which defends the right mind and gives the right mind control over the body. Intellectualization implies a split, while right-mindedness involves healing. And the next defense mechanism, called withdrawal, is properly employed in the service of withdrawing from the meaningless. Proper withdrawal is not a device for escape, but for consolidation. There is only one mind. And the next defense, called dissociation, is quite similar. You should split off or dissociate yourself from error, but only in defense of integration. And the next defense, called detachment, is essentially a weaker form of dissociation. And the next defense mechanism, called flight, can be undertaken in whatever direction you choose. But note that the concept itself of flight implies flight from something, and flight from error is perfectly appropriate. And the next defense mechanism, called distantiation, that defense can be properly used as a way of putting distance between yourself and what you should fly from. And the next defense mechanism, called regression, is an effort to return to your own original state. Regression can thus be utilized to restore rather than to go back to the less mature. Sublimation, the next defense mechanism, should be a redirection of effort to the sublime. There are many other so-called, quote, dynamic concepts, which are profound errors due essentially to the misuse of defenses. Among them is the concept of different levels of aspiration, which actually result from level confusion. However, the main point to be understood from this section is that you can defend truth as well as you defend error, and in fact you can defend truth much better than you can defend error. The means of defending truth instead of error are easier to clarify after the value of the goal of defending truth is firmly established. Everyone defends their own treasure. You don't have to tell people to defend their own treasure because people will do it automatically. The real questions still remain. What do you treasure? and how much do you treasure it? The real questions still remain. What do you treasure, and how much do you treasure it? Once you have learned to consider these two questions and to bring them into all your actions as the true criteria for behavior, then I will have little difficulty in clarifying the means for you. You have not learned to be consistent about asking yourself these two questions and bringing them into all your actions as the true criteria for behavior. You have not learned to be consistent about this as yet. And I have therefore concentrated on showing you what the means are available whenever you ask. You can, however, save a lot of time if you do not extend this step unduly. If you don't extend this step unduly, the step of bringing these two questions into all your actions as the true criteria of behavior, what do I treasure and how much do I treasure it? If you do not extend this step unduly, then the correct focus will shorten the process immeasurably. The plan for the correction of the ego is the only defense which cannot be used destructively. That is because while everyone must eventually join the atonement, the plan for the healing of man, the atonement is not a device which was generated by man. The atonement plan, the correction plan principle, was in effect long before the correction plan itself began. The principle of the atonement was love, and the correction plan itself was an act of love. But acts weren't necessary before the separation because the time-space belief didn't exist. It was only after the separation that the defense of the plan and the necessary conditions for its fulfillment were planned. It became increasingly apparent that all of the defenses which man can choose to use constructively or destructively were not enough to save him. It was therefore decided that man needed a defense which was so splendid that he could not misuse it, although he could refuse it. Man's choice could not, however, turn that plan into a weapon of attack, which is the inherent characteristic of all other defenses. And so this plan for the correction of the ego thus becomes the only defense plan which is not a two-edged sword. The plan for the correction of the ego, the atonement, actually began long before the crucifixion. Many souls offered their efforts on behalf of the separated ones. But these souls who offered their effort on behalf of the separated ones, these souls could not withstand the strength of the attack, and these souls had to be brought back. Angels came too, but their protection did not suffice because the separated ones were not interested in peace. The separated ones had already split their minds and were bent on further dividing their minds rather than reintegrating their minds. The levels that the separated ones introduced into their minds then turned against each other. And the levels that the separated ones introduced into their minds established differences, divisions, cleavages, dispersions, and all other concepts related to the increasing splits which these levels produced. Not being in their right minds, the separated ones turned their defenses from protection to assault and acted literally insanely. And so it was essential to induce and introduce a split-proof device which could be used only to heal if it were used at all. And that's the atonement. It was the split-proof device which could be used only to heal if it were used at all. The healing plan, called the atonement, was built into the space-time belief in order to set a limit on the need for the belief in space-time and ultimately to make learning complete. This corrective plan, called the atonement, is the final lesson. Learning itself, just like the classrooms in which learning occurs, is temporary. And that's because the ability to learn has no value when change of understanding is no longer necessary. The eternally creative have nothing to learn. Only after the separation was it necessary to direct the creative forces to learning, because changed behavior had become mandatory. Men can learn to improve their behavior, and men can also learn to become better and better learners. Learning to improve your behavior and learning to become better and better learners serves to bring you into closer and closer accord with the family of God. But the family of God itself is a perfect creation, and perfection is not a matter of degree. Only while there are different degrees is learning meaningful. The quote, evolution of man is merely a process by which man proceeds from one degree to the next. In this evolution of man, man corrects his previous missteps by stepping forward. Correcting your previous missteps by stepping forward represents a process which is actually incomprehensible in temporal terms, because you are really returning as you go forward. In real evolution, you correct your previous missteps by stepping forward, and in this way you return as you go forward, not backward. The corrective plan, the corrective device for mankind, the atonement, is the device by which you can free yourself from the past as you go ahead. The corrective plan for man, the atonement, undoes your past efforts, thus making it unnecessary for you to keep retracing your steps without advancing to your return. Real evolution is a process that undoes your past errors as you move forward, thus making it unnecessary for you to keep retracing your steps without advancing to your return. In this sense, the atonement saves time, but like the miracle which serves it, the healing plan of man does not abolish time. And that's because as long as there is a need for correction of man, there is need for time. But the correction plan for mankind as a completed plan does have a unique relationship to time. Until this healing plan of man is finished, its various phases will proceed in time, but the whole plan stands at time's end. At time's end, the bridge of the return has been built. The healing plan of mankind, the atonement, is a total commitment. You still think that a total commitment is associated with loss. Associating a total commitment with loss is the same mistake that all the separated ones make in one way or another. The separated ones cannot believe that a defense which cannot attack is the best defense. That the best defense is a defense which cannot attack. This is what is meant by, quote, the meek shall inherit the earth. It means that the best defense is a defense which cannot attack. The meek, who cannot attack, will literally take the earth over because of their strength. That's because a two-way defense, a defense which can attack, is a defense which is inherently weak, precisely because that defense now has two edges. Which means a defense that can attack can also turn against you very unexpectedly. A defense which attacks is a defense, a two-edged sword, which can turn against you very unexpectedly. And this tendency of a two-edged defense, a defense that includes attack, this tendency cannot be controlled except by miracles. The miracle turns the defense of the atonement, which is the correction plan of man. The miracle turns the defense of the plan to the protection of the inner self, which as the inner self becomes more and more secure, the inner self assumes its natural talent of protecting others. The miracle turns the defense of this plan that is not a two-edged sword, this plan which cannot attack, to the protection of the inner self. The protection of the inner self. The inner self which, as it becomes more and more secure, assumes its natural talent of protecting others. The inner self knows itself as both a brother and a child of God. You know that when defenses are disrupted, that there is a period of real disorientation accompanied by fear, guilt, and usually vacillations between anxiety and depression. You know that when defenses are disrupted, there is a period of real disorientation accompanied by fear, guilt, and usually vacillations between anxiety and depression. This course is different in that in this course, defenses are not being disrupted, but reinterpreted. Even though you may experience this as the same thing and feel really disoriented. In the reinterpretation of defenses, only their use for attack is lost. Since this means that the defenses can be used only one way, then these defenses become much stronger and much more dependable. And now these defenses no longer oppose the correction of your ego, but greatly facilitate it. The plan for the correction of the ego can only be accepted within you. You have perceived this plan for the correction of your ego largely as external thus far. And that's why your experience of this healing plan of your ego has been minimal. The reinterpretation of your defenses is essential in releasing the inner light. Since the separation, man's defenses have been used almost entirely to defend himself against the truth, so that man could maintain the separation. Man generally sees this as a need to protect the body, using your defenses to defend yourself against the healing or correction of your ego shows up as a need to protect your body. Using your defenses to maintain your ego shows up as a need to protect the body. The many body fantasies with which men's minds are engaged arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining correction or healing. Perceiving the body as a temple is only the first step in correcting this kind of distortion. Perceiving the body as a temple alters part of the misperception, but not all of it. Perceiving the body as a temple does recognize, however, that the concept of healing in physical terms is not appropriate. However, the next step is to realize that a temple is not a building at all. A temple's real holiness lies in the inner altar around which the building is built. The inappropriate emphasis men have put on beautiful church buildings is a sign of men's fear of real healing and their unwillingness to reach the inner altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. The spiritual eye, on the other hand, cannot see the building at all, because the spiritual eye has perfect sight. The spiritual eye can, however, see the altar with perfect clarity. For perfect effectiveness, healing belongs at the center of the inner altar, where the healing undoes the separation and restores the wholeness of the mind. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear are miscreations of the mind which must be undone. This is what is meant by, quote, the restoration of the temple, unquote. It doesn't mean the restoration of the building, but the opening of the altar to receive the healing plan. And the opening of the mind to receive the correction of the ego. This heals the separation and places within man the one defense against all separation mind errors, which can make you perfectly invulnerable. The acceptance of the healing plan and the acceptance of the correction of the ego by everyone is only a matter of time. In fact, both time and matter were created for this purpose. This appears to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the final decision. If you review the idea carefully, however, you will realize that this is not true. Everything is limited in some way by the manner of its creation. And so, free will can temporize, and free will is capable of enormous procrastination. But free will cannot depart entirely from its creator, who set the limits on its ability to miscreate by virtue of its own real purpose. The misuse of will engenders a situation in which in the extreme becomes altogether intolerable. The misuse of your will engenders a situation which in the extreme becomes altogether intolerable. The misuse of your free will. The misuse of your free will engenders a situation which in the extreme becomes altogether intolerable. Pain thresholds can be high, but pain thresholds are not limitless. And that's because eventually everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. As the recognition that there must be a better way becomes more firmly established, this recognition becomes a perceptual turning point. And this recognition that there must be a better way ultimately reawakens the spiritual eye and simultaneously weakens the investment in physical sight. the alternating investment in the two types of levels of perception, spiritual eye sight and physical sight. The alternating investment in the two types or levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict for a long time and can become very acute, but the outcome is as certain as God. The spiritual eye literally cannot see error, and the spiritual eye merely looks for correction. All the solutions which the physical eyes seek dissolve in the sight of the spiritual eye. The spiritual eye, which looks within, recognizes immediately that the altar or the mind has been defiled and that the mind needs to be repaired and protected. That's what the spiritual eye sees. The spiritual eye looks within and recognizes immediately that the altar or the mind has been defiled and that the mind needs to be repaired and protected. And perfectly aware of the right defense, the spiritual eye passes over all other defenses, looking past error to truth. Because of the real strength of the spiritual eye's vision, the spiritual eye pulls the will into the spiritual eye's service and impels the mind to concur. And this reestablishes the true power of your free will and makes your free will increasingly unable to tolerate delay. And after the true power of your will has been reestablished, which has made you increasingly unable to tolerate delay, then your mind realizes with increasing certainty that delay is only a way of increasing unnecessary pain, which it need not tolerate at all. And then the pain threshold drops accordingly. And then the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. Once the true power of your free will has been established, once the true power of your free will has been established, and the real strength of your spiritual eye pulls your will into its service and impels your mind to concur. The true power of your free will has been reestablished, and then your mind becomes increasingly unable to tolerate delay. The children of God are entitled to perfect comfort, which comes from a sense of perfect trust. You are entitled to perfect comfort, which comes from a sense of perfect trust. Until you achieve perfect trust that you are entitled to, you waste yourself and your true creative powers on useless attempts to make yourself more comfortable by inappropriate means. But the real means of comfort that you are entitled to, the real means of the perfect comfort that you are entitled to, The real means are already provided, and these real means don't involve any effort at all on your part. Your egocentricity usually misperceives this as personally insulting. That the real means for perfect comfort don't involve any effort at all on your part. Your egocentricity misperceives as personally insulting, which is an interpretation which obviously arises from your misperception of yourself. Egocentricity and communion cannot coexist. Even the terms egocentricity and communion are contradictory. The plan for the correction of the ego, the atonement, that's the only gift that's worthy of being offered to your mind, which is the altar of God. And this is because of the inestimable value of the altar to God itself, your mind. And that's because your mind was created perfect, and your mind, the altar to God, is entirely worthy of receiving perfection. God is lonely without his souls, and God's souls are lonely without God. Men must learn to perceive the world as a means of healing the separation. The plan for the healing of the ego, that plan is the guarantee that man will ultimately succeed.